Can you just touch on, you already spoke about the 4 principles or the main principles of Swiss 8. Can you just go through the 8 principles for us, for the listeners?
Yeah, so the top 4, we call them the top 4, bottom 4. So the top 4 is fitness, nutrition, mindfulness, and sleep. And that we call those the top 4 because they are the holistic health lifestyle principles that we try and get people to start with first, build a routine around those 4 principles. And then once you're happy and you're comfortable, that has become habit and it is a routine. Then we've got minimalism, discipline, time management, and personal growth. And they are basically life hack kind of principles.
Yo, what is up, guys? Welcome to today's episode, which is the first in an 8-part mini-series on the principles of Swiss 8. We're kicking off with sleep, then we're going to go into nutrition, followed by time management, discipline, fitness, personal growth, mindfulness, and minimalism. I'm going to bookend these sessions with an interview with Adrian Sutter, who is the founder of Swiss 8, which is a proactive mental health program. And to round out the 8-part miniseries, which will actually be 10 episodes, I'm going to be interviewing my good friend Tristan, who is a former army soldier and is now the owner of Blind Tiger Yoga. Let's get started. Sleep is essential for survival, and many of us could use a little bit more. Whilst the precise function of sleep is not entirely understood, researchers and scientists in recent years have several theories as to why it's so critical for our well-being. We spend roughly a third of our lives asleep, so it's evident that there's definitely some physiological processes that are occurring whilst we're asleep. So this session is all about diving into what those processes are and how it affects us when we are sleep deprived. Now, I'm sure everyone listening has been in a situation where they have been sleep deprived. I'm a former army soldier, and that was one of our training tools when I was going through my initial employment training. Is we would go out bush on exercise and we'd conduct a defensive exercise, and one of the goals there was to put us under stress and adversity and test us in that controlled environment. And we're essentially only sleeping like half an hour to 2 hours per night. And this would continue on for 3, 4, 5, 6 days sometimes. We would also be lacking food and we were being worked to the bone. So we had high output and low input regarding food. And obviously we weren't sleeping very much, so our ability to recover was affected. Now, there were times where I was sitting in a hole that I dug, a pit, at 3 o'clock in the morning, and after a couple of days of poor food or no food, barely any sleep, high work output, etc., I was fucking hallucinating. I was seeing things. The guy next to me, I thought I saw Mike Tyson in the bushes, and the guy next to me thought he saw Bugs Bunny, and it was evident that we were losing our minds because we hadn't had any sleep and we were really running on fumes. So I'm sure everyone's been in this situation where they have been sleep deprived, and when we're younger, it's like a badge of honor. It's like, yeah, I pulled an all-nighter last night, and we don't really understand the effect that has on us and the implications to our health and particularly our immune system that pulling all-nighters have, and not getting good quality sleep. It's not just about the amount of sleep that we have, but it's about the quality of sleep that we get as well. In fact, recent studies have shown that sleep deprivation can have the same impacts and cause the same or similar impairments to drinking alcohol. So pair this with driving and you're asking for trouble. Now, most people are aware of the dangers of drinking and driving, but they don't make any association with being sleep deprived and driving. But research has shown that drowsy driving can be just as fatal. Like alcohol, sleep exhaustion or sleep deprivation slows down reaction times, decreases awareness, impairs judgment, and increases your risks of crashing. According to the National Sleep Foundation, an average of 100,000 crashes each year are caused by fatigued drivers. 55% of these drowsy driving crashes are caused by drivers under the age of 25. For prevention, they've laid out signs of drowsy driving, which are difficulty focusing, frequent blinking or heavy eyelids, daydreaming, wandering, disconnected thoughts, trouble remembering the last few miles driven or missing exits or traffic signs, yawning repeatedly or rubbing your eyes, trouble keeping your head up, drifting from your lane, tailgating or hitting a shoulder rumble, and feeling restless and irritable. Now here's the thing, we've all had a poor night's sleep and driven to work, gone through the entire day, and just felt shit throughout the entire day, likely made poor decisions when it comes to food, probably haven't had the energy to train, have been irritable, haven't been a good person to be around, etc. So it's obvious that getting a poor night's sleep can really affect your ability to perform throughout the day. Now for me, sleep is very important for me. I actually wrote down a list of my values recently, a couple of months ago. And, I wrote down sleep, I wrote down nutrition, I wrote down gut health, hormone regulation, health and fitness, etc., immune system, as well as personal development and study and things like that. Now, once I had these things written down, I actually went back through the list and I decided to prioritize which was the most important to me. And I looked at everything on the list and I said, right, if one of these slips up and I'm not doing it or I'm not doing enough of it, then which one's going to have the biggest impact on all of the other things? And I went back through the list and I ended up putting number one as my sleep. So I really try and prioritize my sleep. And for me, that means that I protect the first hour of the day and the last hour of the day, because that last hour of the day is what's setting me up for sleep. And then the first hour of the day is what's setting me up for the day. So I always want to finish the day on a good note. And then I want to start the day on a good note, on the front foot. So I'm going to circle back to these points here and I'll talk about my evening routine and my morning routine to set myself up for a good night's sleep. But prior to that, I'll discuss why it's important to get good quantity sleep as well as good quality sleep. Now, here's something to consider. Human beings are the only species that deliberately deprive ourselves of sleep. Isn't that crazy? Think about any fucking animal. Okay, they sleep when they're tired. They sleep when they're ready. They sleep when they feel like it. But as humans in the world that we live in, we're kind of forced to work throughout the day and perform and operate and things like that. And then, we go to sleep at nighttime. Now, this is an evolutionary response and we're supposed to sleep at nighttime, but with the world that we live in, with bright lights and technology and all that sort of stuff, we kind of keep ourselves up for longer periods of time than we should, and we get up earlier than we should. So think about it like this. How much sleep do you need? Well, this is a contentious subject and scientists are still arguing and debating over this, but for each individual person, that's going to be different. Now, I've spoken about the autonomic nervous system in previous episodes, but essentially the autonomic nervous system is the balance between your sympathetic state, which is fight or flight, and the parasympathetic state, which is rest and digest. Now, we spend all of this time in this fight or flight state, which is essentially a stress response. Now, stress is essential for adaptation, all right, but it's only when we can balance that out with the parasympathetic, we drive the parasympathetic system, we go into rest and digest state, then we start breaking down our foods and pushing them towards the systems that we've broken down and put under stress throughout the day, that we actually recover and adapt and get back to homeostasis. And when we get a good night's sleep, this is essentially where we go through the majority of that restoration, recuperation, rejuvenation process. So just like everything else when it comes to nutrition, training, lifestyle, etc., it's all individual specific. So somebody who's under large amounts of stress due to work, finances, relationship, education, whatever, if they're under massive amounts of stress all the time, then they're typically going to need more sleep. Okay, if you're someone who's fairly chilled, you do some yin yoga and things like that, and you do other or you use other tools that balance out your autonomic nervous system, drive the parasympathetic state, might be something like massages or ice bath or sauna or sleep deprivation, a float tank, a sensory deprivation tank or something like that. If you're using these tools, then you're likely adding these parasympathetic drives into your day to balance out the stress state that you put yourself in. However, if you're not using these tools throughout the rest of the day, then you're likely going to need more sleep. So how do we figure out how much sleep we need? Well, obviously now is probably a little bit of a tough time to do it, but say a month ago when everyone was in lockdown, a good way of figuring out how much sleep you need is to go to bed at the same time. So for example, I might go to bed at 10 o'clock. I typically turn my phone off at 9 o'clock. I make sure that I'm not on any technology, particularly blue lights or anything like that. I'll discuss why in a moment. But I basically want to chill everything out and get myself ready for bed. Then I go to sleep. I'm in bed at about 10 o'clock. I'm not going to set an alarm, okay? And I'm just going to track my sleep over the course of a week. And if I wake up at, say, 6 o'clock, 6:15 every morning, and I'm roughly getting to sleep at about 10:15, then I know that I need roughly 8 hours sleep. All right, so whenever you get a holiday or something like that, or a bit of time off work, and you can actually go through this process, I highly recommend figuring out how much sleep you need. For me, I know that I need roughly 7.5 hours of sleep because I've done this numerous times. Think about when you go camping, okay? If you've ever been camping, what normally happens is you're not exposed to all of this artificial light and all of this stimulus from the external environment. So, once the sun goes down and the fire's going, you've had some food and things like that, it's 7:30 and you're like, right, I'm going to bed, I'm tired, right? That's the body's natural response. And I'll talk about hormone regulation, circadian rhythm in a moment. But then you basically wake up when the sun comes up, okay? So that's a good indication of you needing that much sleep. But obviously in the day and age that we live in, we're affected by all of these, artificial lights and external stimulation, which, affects our hormone regulation and our ability to get to sleep and have a good night's sleep. Now, sleep is something that I always talk about with my clients, and every single time when I ask people how they sleep, they're always like, yeah, I sleep pretty good, or I don't sleep very good. But the people that do say they sleep pretty good, I'm like, all right, is there any times where, you wake up tired, you wake up not feeling refreshed, and you wake up feeling like you need a little bit more sleep? And they're like, yeah, a couple times a week. I'm like, all right, you're not actually sleeping well, okay? People don't know that they're not sleeping well. If you're waking up in the morning and you're needing, a coffee, 2 coffees straight away to get yourself going, and, stimulation and music and things like that, then you probably haven't slept very well. Now, what we're going to go into next is the different sleep stages and the brain waves that occur throughout these different sleep stages, and why it's important to get 1, good quantity sleep, but 2, good quality sleep, and what these different brain waves and different sleep stages do for us. Now, depending on who you speak to and where you get your information from, whether you've read books or done courses or read articles and things like that, you'll typically hear that there's 3 to 4 to 5 stages of sleep. Now, for the purpose of this podcast and for educational purposes, I'm going to use 3 stages of sleep, being light, deep, and REM sleep. And we'll also discuss the different brain waves that go along that are linked to those different stages. Okay, so our beta brain waves are when we are awake, normal, alert, and conscious. Okay, as we drift off into sleep, we'll go into our first stage of our light sleep, which usually lasts about 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, we start drifting into an alpha brainwave state here, which is relaxed, lucid, calm, and not thinking. Okay, in this stage of sleep, it's a lot easier to be woken by external stimulus. If you hear a noise or smell something burning or something like that, much easier to wake up. Okay. Then we drop into phase 2 of our light sleep, which brings on theta brain waves, which is a deeper relaxation, meditative state, and also produces mental imagery. Okay, we'll spend about 15 to 20 minutes in this state after we go through the first phase, which is roughly 5 to 10 minutes, depending on each individual person. Okay, from there, we start dropping into our deep sleep, which is our delta brain waves, which is a deep, dreamless sleep. From there, we'll typically transition into REM sleep, okay? And again, we'll have a different brainwave pattern associated with that REM sleep. But we'll talk about the 3 stages of sleep, why they're important, and what they actually do on a biological and physiological basis. We typically go through all 3 phases of this sleep during a sleep cycle. Now, sleep cycle typically lasts about 90 minutes, okay? Some people say 60 minutes up to 2 hours. Let's use 90 minutes as an example. So light sleep is going to come first. This is kind of where you're drifting off, but you're still kind of alert to what's going on outside. Then we go into our deep sleep. Okay, then we come back into a light sleep, followed by REM sleep. Now, deep sleep typically occurs earlier in the night. So if you're going to bed late, you're going to be missing out on a lot of deep sleep. Now, as the night progresses and it gets closer towards the morning, we might go through 4 to 5 to 6 sleep cycles, those 90-minute sleep cycles throughout the night. So if we're going to bed late, we might be missing out on our deep sleep. But then as we progress through the night and get earlier towards the morning, that deep sleep drops off and we start transitioning more into light sleep and REM sleep. So if you're getting up earlier than you normally do, then you could potentially be affecting your light sleep and your REM sleep. Now we'll discuss each one of those sleep stages and what they do for us and why it's important to make sure that we protect our sleep so that we can optimize our health and function. So during the first phase of light sleep, this is the type of sleep that's a little bit more choppy, shallow, and not really restful. It's usually just a quick transition. Like I said, it's roughly about 5 to 10 minutes, so you're not in it for very long. However, you will still hear things in your environment and you'll have a sense of awareness and your brain dips into sleep, but it doesn't feel like true sleep. Okay, so that's phase 1 of light sleep. In phase 2 of light sleep, this is where we can still be easily awoken. However, it's not shallow. Okay, light sleep takes up more than half of your sleep cycle throughout the night and is typically going to be a lot more prevalent later on in the night towards early morning. This is where the brain processes memories and emotions and your metabolism regulates. A lot of body maintenance also occurs compared to other stages of sleep, and the digestive system in particular undergoes maintenance along with a reduction of your heart rate and your respiratory rate. Stage 2 of this light sleep typically lasts about 15 to 20 minutes before our brain waves start changing patterns and dropping into our delta brain waves, which pushes us into deep sleep. During deep sleep, the brain becomes less responsive to outside stimuli. Breathing slows down, your muscles relax, and your heart rate usually becomes a lot more regular. Deep sleep is very much about the body. The thinking parts of the brain are mainly offline and no dreaming occurs at all during this time. Throughout the body, this is where the rebuilding, reparation, rejuvenation process is occurring for the most part. So if you're training really hard, it's important to get this deep sleep so that you can allow that recovery process to occur. This is also where the body secretes growth hormone, which is associated with cellular rebuilding and repair. And the digestive and immune systems are upregulated and rebuilt and refurbished during this phase. Now, the first and second sleep cycles, those 90-minute sleep cycles, is typically where the majority of this deep sleep occurs. So again, if you're going to sleep later than what you normally do, you could potentially be missing out on some of this deep sleep. Okay, once we go through that deep sleep, then we're going to come back through a light phase and then transition into the REM sleep. So whilst the deep sleep is about the body, REM sleep is about the brain. The brain is very active during REM sleep and the body is very inactive. Most muscles are actually paralyzed, and REM sleep is where most dreaming happens and eyes move rapidly in multiple directions. The heart rate increases again and breathing becomes a little bit more irregular. REM sleep has also been shown to be important for emotional regulation and memory. The brain is essentially cleared of things that aren't needed. However, it's also important for the body. In REM sleep, peak protein synthesis at the cellular level keeps many processes in the body working properly. Now, I don't want to spend too much more time on the sleep cycles because I want to give some actionable takeaways about how to get a good night's sleep. But it's important to note that if you're changing your sleep time and you're changing your wake time, then that's going to affect those different sleep cycles. So those 90-minute sleep cycles, like I said earlier, we'll go through 4 to 5 to 6, depending on how much sleep you're getting. So the first sleep cycle is you're going to transition through the light sleep into deep sleep fairly quickly, where you'll spend the majority of your time in that first sleep cycle. Then you'll transition back into light sleep and then a little bit of REM sleep. Okay. round about the 90-minute mark, you'll transition into sleep cycle 2. So you'll go back into light sleep, then you'll dip into deep sleep, you'll come back out into light sleep, and then you'll go back into REM sleep. Now, the deep sleep in stage 2 is not as much as it is in stage 1. Okay, from there, you'll come back into light sleep, and then pretty much from stage 3, about 3 hours after you go to sleep, throughout the rest of the night, that's pretty much where most of your deep sleep is occurring, okay? Then for the rest of the sleep cycles, you're going to be spending a lot more time in light sleep and transitioning between light and REM sleep. So on average, light sleep will take up to around about 50 to 60% more of your sleep on an average night, whereas deep sleep takes up roughly 10 to 25% depending on your age, and REM sleep makes up about 20 to 25% of your nightly sleep. So REM sleep mostly takes place in the second half of the night, and during this second half of the night, the sleep cycles break down as your body alternates between light sleep and REM sleep for the rest of the night. Now, before I go into tools and techniques into optimizing sleep and in particular circadian rhythm, I just want to touch on some data that I recently came across whilst I was researching for this episode. Now, for me, seeing this data was super interesting, and that is basically when we transition from normal time into daylight savings time. So we bring our clocks forward an hour. So the Monday after we change to daylight savings time, there's actually a spike, an increase in the instances of heart attacks by 24%. When we go the other way and transition from daylight savings time back to normal time, there's a decrease by roughly 23% in heart attacks the day after. Super interesting there. Now, that's not cause and effect. That is simply a correlation, but that should give you an understanding of potentially some issues that may arise when we're going from time zone to time zone. And particularly, this is very important when we start thinking about transitioning from, time zones where you live to time zones where you're traveling or something like that. I've got a lot of fighters that fight overseas, and basically we're looking at, for every hour of time difference between the time zones, there's roughly a day per hour that your body's going to be under stress, and it's going to need a day per hour to recover and realign its body clock and start changing hormone profiles and things like that. So something to bear in mind. Another super interesting study that I found was a group of researchers took a large number of participants from 8 hours sleep per night down to 6 hours sleep per night over the course of a week. Now, what the researchers found was that the gene expression of these participants was changed dramatically, with an average of 711 genes being expressed differently per person due to a 2-hour sleep deprivation per night. Now, what does this mean? Okay, cells that are responsible for immune function were decreased. Why is this important? Because essentially our immune system is what keeps us safe. Our body creates antibodies and physiological responses to react to any kind of threat that's going on with the body, internal or external threats. So if your immune system is suppressed, then that's going to make you a lot more likely to catch anything that's going around, and it's going to affect your ability to recover. It's going to affect your ability to perform. It's going to affect your ability to digest, assimilate, absorb nutrients, break down your foods, etc. Now, what they also found was that cells that are responsible for tumor promoting, inflammation, and cardiovascular disease were actually increased, and this was only 2 hours of lack of sleep per night over the course of a week. Now, this is massive. This is definitely something to consider if you are sleep deprived for long periods of time. And this is essentially genetics versus epigenetics. So genetics is your DNA. This is what you're born with. This is your genes. Okay. Epigenetics is the effect of environmental factors, which is essentially how your genes are expressed. So yes, you're born with genes, you're born with DNA, but your lifestyle determines how those genes are expressed. I will dedicate an entire episode on genetics versus epigenetics, or nature versus nurture, in the future. But the final point that I want to make here is that a lack of sleep can dramatically decrease immune function. In fact, one study found that natural killer cells, which are basically these cells that kick around in the body, they're like assassins, and they pretty much terminate any bad cells that are proliferating and growing. And when researchers took participants from 8 hours down to 4 hours sleep a night, their natural killer cell production and function decreased by up to 70%, and that was after one night's sleep. So obviously a few nights poor sleep can have a massive impact on these killer cells, which then affects your immune function. So much so that the World Health Organization has actually classified shift work as a possible carcinogen. And to me, this makes total sense because of something called circadian rhythm. Now, circadian rhythm is your body's natural clock, okay? So when the sun's up, your body has all of these receptors, particularly your eyes and in your skin, that essentially tell your brain what time of the day it is. And then that's going to signal to your endocrine system, which is essentially your hormones, what time of the day it is. And then your body's going to start secreting and producing these hormones to essentially drive your physiological processes, right? So when the sun's up, our body starts changing our hormone profile. When the sun goes down, our body starts changing our hormone profile. So if you're fighting against biology and these circadian rhythms, then that can wreak havoc on the hormones, but also immune cell function and all of these other processes that go on in the body. Now, let's think about circadian rhythm from an evolutionary perspective. We wake up in the morning, the sun hits our eyes, all of this light spectrum, and that signals to our brain that it's daytime. Let's get up, let's fire up the metabolism, let's start moving, let's start producing and releasing stored energy so that we can search for food, water, and shelter. Okay, so when we wake up in the morning, our cortisol increases, which is essentially a stress hormone. It's been called a stress hormone. Okay, it's not necessarily a stress hormone, but it is associated with stress. But essentially, cortisol levels rise, and then that kind of prepares our body, creates this physiological response to essentially get up and get everything firing. Okay, now cortisol levels throughout the day are going to dip and rise depending on what's going on, okay? But for the most part, you're going to have an increase in cortisol first thing in the morning, which is going to increase adrenaline production as well. Now, cortisol levels will typically spike around lunchtime again, okay? And then they'll start dipping off for the rest of the day. There's also another hormone called serotonin, which is responsible for a number of things. But for the context of this conversation, think about serotonin as your daytime hormone and melatonin as your nighttime hormone. And these two essentially work inversely. As one raises, the other falls. Now, I'm not going to go too deep here, but I will talk about the relationship between serotonin and melatonin. So serotonin is sometimes considered a hormone, but it's, for the most part, most people consider it a neurotransmitter. Now, most serotonin, around 90%, is produced in specialized cells in the GI tract. Now, serotonin is pretty popularly thought of as a contributor to feelings of well-being and happiness, although its actual biological function is complex and multifaceted. Okay, modulating cognition, reward, learning, memory, and numerous other physiological processes. I just want to pause there for a moment and discuss the difference between a neurotransmitter and a hormone, because I did refer to serotonin before as a daytime hormone. Okay, some people do consider it a hormone, but it is primarily referred to as a neurotransmitter. Now, what is a neurotransmitter? A neurotransmitter are the chemical messages that are used by the nervous system to transmit nerve impulses across the synapses, which is basically a signal from the brain down to the muscles or whatever cell that it's trying to talk to, used through the nervous system. Whereas hormones are the chemical messengers used by the endocrine system, which is the system that mediates and regulates hormone production, and that's used to stimulate or communicate with specific cells in the body. And that's done via the production and secretion of these hormones into the bloodstream, where the blood circulates and pushes these hormones to these particular cells that the body wants to talk to. So that brings me to my next point. When the sun starts going down, the receptors in the body start talking to the brain, and it downregulates the neurotransmitter serotonin and upregulates the hormone melatonin. And this is essentially what gets us ready for and prepared for sleep. It's a downregulation of the central nervous system, kind of chilling everything out and telling everything that, right, it's time to rest, recover, recuperate, recharge, so that we can go through the day-to-day trials and tribulations the following day. So both serotonin and melatonin play a part in our biological clock, essentially our sleep-wake cycles. Now, if there's certain environmental factors that are impacting the release of serotonin and the production secretion of melatonin, this can adversely affect your sleep cycles, making it very difficult to get to sleep and to stay asleep, and also affects the quality of sleep. So what we'll do now is go through some tools and techniques on maximizing and optimizing your natural circadian rhythm. And the fact that I've explained how these circadian rhythms work and how light and dark can affect the neurotransmitters and the hormones should give you a fairly good understanding of how you can start connecting the dots yourself. One of the biggest disruptors of this natural circadian rhythm is light. Light sources at nighttime. When the sun goes down, we live in this world where we live by fluorescent lights. And we also spend a lot of time on tablets, phones, TVs, and things like that, which emit blue light. Now, I've actually read a study about blue light. For every hour of blue light that you have in your face prior to going to bed can affect up to 30 minutes of your ability to get into that deep sleep, which typically occurs earlier on in the night. So blue light is not inherently bad. It is part of the light spectrum that we see that hits our eyes throughout the day and can increase awareness, etc. But what we don't want to do is concentrate that light in our face, because then that signals to the brain that essentially the fucking sun's up. So it's going to start changing our hormone profile, release serotonin, cortisol, which will increase adrenaline, etc. And that makes it really, really difficult to get to sleep, down-regulate, switch off. So when the sun goes down, we really want to try and replicate the light-dark cycles. So once the sun goes down, what I do is I dim my lights, and I'm not going to be going anywhere that's got, very high fluorescent lighting or anything like that. And if I do need to do that, I typically put on my blue light blocking glasses. And I'll also do this throughout the day. So if I know that I'm going to be spending a lot of time on my laptop or phone throughout the day, I'll put my blue light blocking glasses on just to stop that blue light from being concentrated in my face. And definitely when the sun goes down, that's when I pop my blue light blocking glasses on. The next thing that I do is I really try and think about when I'm eating, okay? I'm not going to be eating too close to bed, okay? Because that's going to stimulate the digestive system, and that's going to get all these other physiological processes, this physiological snowballing effect kicking off, and it's going to affect blood sugar levels, which is going to affect insulin, which is going to affect, all of these hormones throughout the body. So I'm going to try and really stick to time-restricted eating, where I'm essentially eating when the sun's up and I'm not eating once the sun goes down. And again, let's go back to working with those light-dark cycles. So when the sun is up, it's important to get outside and get some sunshine. Most people these days are not getting enough sunshine, and our skin synthesizes UV rays from the sun and creates vitamin D, which is absolutely essential for health and immune function. All right, so we want to get some good quality sunlight on our skin throughout the day. Once the sun goes down, then we want to try and create a nice dark environment in our bedroom. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is actually setting up your environment, because I recently spoke to one of my online clients, and he was saying that he was having some trouble sleeping. So, he was up until fucking all hours of the morning, and I was like, what are you doing? And he goes, I'm working. And he was working from bed, and I'm like, dude, it's your fucking bed. You need to create this association with your bed. Like if you're going to bed and you're working from bed, okay, that's what your brain is going to associate your bed with. So you really need to think about your bed as being a place for sleep and maybe some extracurricular activities, but for the most part, you want to think about that as your sleep time, your bedtime. Okay, so when you go to bed, your brain kicks off that habit loop essentially and starts preparing your body for sleep. The other thing we want to do is try and create a really dark environment. So if there's any ambient light coming in to the room, and even if it's hitting your eyes with your eyelids closed, that's still going to affect your brain and how it perceives what time of the day it is. So if you do have ambient light in your room, I recommend getting an eye mask, so you can really try and create that dark space. And using earplugs is a really good idea as well, particularly if you live in an area where there is some ambient noise coming into the room. The final thing I'll talk about here before we go into building a sleep routine is that our body requires its core temperature to drop by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius for us to start dipping into that deep sleep. So it's important here to maybe turn your aircon down a little bit, or set yourself up so that you can cool your core temperature, which is then going to allow you to get to sleep much, much better. So let's now discuss building a sleep routine. Most people have a morning routine. They have a routine around training and exercise. They have a routine around eating. They have a routine around work. They've got a routine around a lot of things in their life, but most people don't consider having a sleep routine. They pretty much stay on their phones right up until they want to go to sleep, and then they put their fucking head on the pillow and expect to fall asleep and have a good night's sleep, and they wake up in the morning going, why do I feel like shit? All right, so we need to start prioritizing sleep, and that means we start building a sleep routine, okay? So we create the environment that's going to allow us to, 1, down-regulate the nervous system, and then 2, get into a comfortable, safe space so the brain can switch off and go, cool, we're safe now. Let's sleep, let's recover, let's rejuvenate so we can get after this again tomorrow. So I'm going to discuss my sleep routines, but point to note here is that you need to figure out what's going to work best for you. As long as you apply those principles of working with the light-dark cycle, minimizing blue light before bed, etc., dropping core temperature, creating a dark, cool environment to get to sleep, then you're going to be pretty good. So find what works best for you. But for me, sleep is so important. So I really try and protect the first hour of the day and the last hour of the day, either side of my sleep cycles, because that last hour of the day is what sets me up for sleep, and then that first hour of the day is what sets me up for, the day ahead, puts me on the front foot. So I'll talk about the last hour of the day first. Once the sun goes down, I'm dimming my lights and I'm minimizing my lights that I'm exposed to as much as possible. If I do need to go out, or I am using lights and things like that, then again, I'll put my blue light blocking glasses on. And I'm trying to minimize my phone time and my laptop time here. This is where I might put on Netflix and, I'm sitting 5 meters away from a TV screen, so I'm not getting that blue light concentrated in my face. All right, I'm still wearing my blue light blocking glasses there though. Then I'm going to turn off my technology. My phone goes off at 9 o'clock every night. I'm trying to be asleep around about 10 o'clock. So that last hour, I'm not using technology. And this is where I'm going to read. Okay, I'll also have a journal next to my bed where I'll basically do a brain dump, because a lot of the times when we're laying in bed, we're thinking about, I've got to do this tomorrow, I've got to pay this bill, I've got to email this person, I've got to call this fucking person about whatever. All right, and 30 minutes later, you're going through the exact same process again. So just having a journal next to your bed is a great way of doing a brain dump. So you've written that stuff down, and that gives you peace of mind. It makes it so much easier to fall asleep. And it's important to note here that I use a pen and paper, okay? Because if you're grabbing your phone and writing notes in your phone, then you're defeating the whole purpose. All right, so once I've done that brain dump, I'm just going to be reading something that interests me but is not super stimulating. Okay, and this is where I'm just going to be focusing on taking nice deep breaths and regulating my my heart rate and my respiratory rate, and that helps me kind of chill out, down-regulate the sympathetic nervous system, push my autonomic nervous system into my parasympathetic state, which is my rest and digest state, so that, it makes it so much easier to get to sleep and to stay asleep. And this is a good point here, and this is a great place to put in some meditation or mindfulness or whatever you want to call it. So we're essentially thinking about taking nice, deep, long breaths, and I'm paying attention to my muscle tone. So I'll take a nice, deep breath in, and as I exhale, I'm scanning like my face. Am I holding tension in my face? Am I scrunching my face up? Okay, I'm going to try and relax those muscles. Deep breath in, long breath out. Okay, what's happening with my neck? Am I shrugging my shoulders up? Are my traps fired up, etc.? And I'm literally just going to use my breath to go through my body and scan what muscles are holding tension. Okay, and I'm going to try and think about really relaxing those muscles. And basically what that does is it tells the brain that we're in a safe space. You can switch off those muscles. We push into that parasympathetic state, which allows us to drop off to sleep much, much easier. So the next thing I want to talk about is creating consistency and regularity. So again, your body's going to adapt to whatever you do, okay? So think about it like this. If you always eat at the same time every day, then you're going to start getting hungry at the same time every day. Now, it's the same thing with our sleep, okay? If we can condition our body into going through these routines, going through these patterns to be able to be asleep at a certain time so we can get the required amount of sleep, then it's going to make it so much fucking easier to have that routine, have that pattern, and prepare the body for that. Now, this is the same for the weekends. I typically try and wake up at the same time on the weekends as well. I might have one day, maybe a Sunday or something like that, where I might, I'm still going to wake up at the same time, but then I'm going to allow myself to go back to sleep. So building that regularity around your sleep is super important. Now, the next thing I'll talk about is my morning routine. So again, the first hour of the day and the last hour of the day is super important for me. And I don't touch my phone during those hours, okay? Sorry, I lie there. If I do touch my phone in the morning, it's because I take my heart rate, and I'll also take my heart rate variability, okay? And I'm just logging those in my phone, but I've disciplined myself not to use my phone or look at any notifications or anything like that first thing in the day. So I'm also not using my phone as an alarm. If I do use it as an alarm, it's on the other side of the room, okay? And I'm making sure that that alarm is not that fucking wah, wah, wah. Okay, it's a nice, easy song that kind of just eases me out of sleep. And I use the ascending alarm as well, where, it starts off light and then a minute or two later, it's getting louder, 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 okay? So that's a much easier way, a much better way of waking up, instead of having that fucking blaring alarm that's going to automatically put you into this sympathetic state where your body essentially thinks it's under threat. So this is what my morning routine looks like. 6 o'clock, my alarm goes off. I get out of bed. I walk over to my blinds. I open my blinds. I open the door. I let some sunlight in. I let some fresh air in. I turn my aircon off. I make my bed, then I lay back down in my bed. I'll take my blood pressure, then I'll take my heart rate variability. I'll log those in my phone, then my phone goes down. The next thing I do is go to the bathroom, shit, shower, shave, do what I need to do, and then I make a coffee. I walk out onto my balcony and I'll sit there and I'll drink a coffee. I'll do some meditation, maybe 20 breaths or something like that over about 5 minutes. I'm going to watch the sunrise. I'm just going to pay attention to my senses. And then I'm going to do about 15 to 20 to 30 minutes of reading to set me up for the day. Once I've done that, then I'm going to sit down and write out my schedule for the day, the things that I need to get done, my appointments, and then the things that I want to get done. That might be my training or massages or study or something like that. Okay. I'm also looking at my journal from the night before, all the shit that I've written down during that brain dump, and I might have written 15 things down. Okay, I can probably look at 3 of those things and go, right, I need to get them done this week. Where can I add them into my day or into my week? This is one thing that I need to get done today, so where can I put that in? And the other, 10 to 12 things are just bullshit. I've just literally done a brain dump, so they're not actually that important, or if they are important, they need to get done at some stage. Then I'm just looking at my week or my month, and I'm figuring out where I can start adding those things in. To round out this episode, sleep is not an optional lifestyle luxury. It is a non-negotiable biological necessity. So to recap this episode, work with your light-dark rhythms. When the sun is up, this is when you're getting the majority of your movement in, your exercise, your food. Get some sunshine throughout the day. Then when the sun goes down, try and minimize any ambient light, particularly fluorescent lights and blue light, which is damaging to your sleep. Make your bedroom the place where you sleep. Make that the association that you have. That's where you're relaxed. That's where you're chilling out. That's where you're focusing on rest, recovery. Make the room dark. Make the room cool. Have a hot shower, as hot as you can handle, prior to going to bed, and make that last hour of the night before you go to sleep technology free. This is where you might have some sleepy tea. You'll do a little bit of a brain dump. You're not using technology, and you're just doing things that are going to allow you to chill out, switch off, and prepare you for sleep. So you're essentially building a routine around getting good quality sleep. Now, before I cap off the episode, I want to discuss some ways to kind of mitigate the effects of throwing off your circadian rhythm. So if you're a shift worker, for example, then your circadian rhythm is going to be out of whack. And again, this is why it's very important to have a really dark, cool room, because if you finish work 5 o'clock in the morning, for example, you get home, that's basically like when you should be winding down. So that's when you should be really trying to minimize any light, and in particular blue light, before you go to bed. If you are going to be using your phone, or you are going to be driving to and from work, etc., when the sun comes up, this is where you're using blue light blockers, so you can block out that blue light from that light spectrum. So you're essentially trying to switch your circadian rhythm around. And this is where your eating will come into play. This is where your training will come into play, etc., etc. So, for example, if you're starting work at 6 p.m., then you might get up at, say, 3:30 p.m., and that's going to be your morning routine. Okay, yes, you want to get some light in then. You're probably going to go and do some exercise. You're preparing breakfast. Okay, and then throughout the night, this is where you can use blue light to keep you awake, keep you alert. But as soon as that sun comes up, you're essentially going through that down regulation process where you're basically trying to reverse engineer your hormones and that light dark cycle. This also comes into play when you're traveling to another country in a different time zone. So you can actually use these tools when you go to a different time zone. For example, if you go to a different time zone that's, say, 6 hours behind, then you want to try and replicate those light-dark rhythms as close as possible. So you might stay up a little bit longer. Even though you're tired, you're not going to be napping, and you'll wait until it gets dark before you go to sleep. Another thing to do here is, as soon as you get to that location, try and get some sunshine. To replicate the time at home throughout the day when the sun's up, and then when the sun goes down, this is where you're switching everything off and essentially going through that sleep routine that you've set for yourself back home. So the same processes occur, you're just reverse engineering that, and you're aligning that with your new time zone. Okay. Something else that's quite interesting is the effect of like red light saunas and red light therapy. So if you get to a place where it's actually dark and in your home location it's typically light, a good way to kind of hack the system is to use some red light therapy, so that your brain essentially thinks that you're still in that time zone, and you're still getting that light spectrum, and that's going to help you adapt to that new time zone much better. Obviously, if you are switching time zones or you are a shift worker, then it's going to be very difficult, particularly if you do, say, 1 week when you're on night shift and then the following week you're on day shift. Like, that can really fuck up your sleep rhythms and your circadian rhythm. So the quicker you can adapt your body to that new cycle, the better. And this is where understanding those sleep routines, those patterns, and those different tools really comes into play, because now you can grab those tools and you can apply them at the appropriate time to elicit the right response. And you can start changing your hormone profile simply by, minimizing light or maximizing light, getting sunshine, using blue light blockers, red light therapy, etc., etc. The Western world is in the middle of a mental health crisis, and our veterans have taken action. Swiss8's team of combat veterans have built a proactive mental health program that is delivered through a mobile app. The app offers users programs in 8 categories of health and lifestyle, all proven to reduce anxiety and depression. This holistic model forms your daily routine, aiding you to build structure, improve discipline, and take ownership of your life. Once these habits are formed, the app will teach you new skills that can form identity, purpose, and encourage physical interaction to rebuild your tribe and reduce isolation.